I want to start with the stories that we all know or think that we know, Kevin. Um, One of the situations or examples that we talked about the other day was around Thanksgiving.
Mhm.
Do you want to get us started?
Sure. Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's nice to be here. I too want to thank the Capitol Historical Society. Um, One of the things that I came to realize, and one of the reasons I went to the National Museum of the American Indian, was that the information that most people had, including people in positions of power with a great deal of authority over the communities that I represented, were working from some really bad information. And that they had acquired that information primarily in two places. One was from the popular culture, television, books, movies, all the places we go to be entertained. And the other is in the formal education system, in the schools. And the information that one could glean about Native Americans from those two sources was almost entirely wrong. And so, and nevertheless, there are stories that we were all taught in school, and Thanksgiving is one of those stories. So we all know the happy story of the pilgrims fleeing from religious prosecution, arriving in the New World, there to be greeted by a friendly Indian named Squanto. And Squanto very helpfully helped the pilgrims learn how to grow corn. And the next year they had a grand harvest, and the pilgrims invited the Indians to come and have a feast with them. And from that, and it did kind of happen that way, but from that we've grown this entire Thanksgiving industrial complex that we all enjoy. And I like to tell people, yeah, the day after Thanksgiving, the Pilgrims and Indians went and did a little shopping, then they played some football, and it was a good time was had by all. But it obscures some very complicated engagements between the first permanent settlers from Europe and the tribes of New England. Um, there was a great deal of diplomacy going on. The Pilgrims were both feared, and other tribes sought them as allies. And the Pilgrims were relatively clever in playing off these relations with the different tribes. Um, so this friendly Indian Squanto, well, it turns out his name was really Tisquantum, something like that. And when Tisquantum first began to engage the Pilgrims, he spoke English. Now, I never knew that when I was in school, because that would lead to the question of, well, how would he learn how to speak English? Well, it turns out that not once but twice, he had been captured by Indian fishing captains and taken back to Europe and sold into slavery. He managed two times to escape, whether through lawful process or otherwise, made his way back to the New World, only to find that the town that he came from had been absolutely wiped out by a smallpox epidemic. So Tisquantum was a man without a country, and he found himself in a curious position of being a go-between between the English and the tribes of New England, in particular the Wampanoags. Carry the story forward just a few decades. The Pilgrims had acquired enough Wampanoag land that the Wampanoags were left in utter destitution. That resulted in a war between the Wampanoags and the Pilgrims, and the result was the absolute devastation of tribes in New England, Connecticut, Massachusetts, even as far north as Vermont, New Hampshire, and really was set the precedent for what would follow throughout the rest of the country. So while it is true that there was this occasion when the Indians and the Pilgrims engaged and had a feast, it wasn't a big deal to anybody. We only learned about it. We didn't learn about the first Thanksgiving until sometime in the mid-19th century, when an old diary of one of the Pilgrims was discovered, and the entry about this occasion was literally a footnote in this guy's journal. And he said the Indians came over and we ate together. From this, we've created this whole Thanksgiving myth. And that's very interesting to me because part of Indians are part of the national identity in this way. So a lot of these key origin stories about the United States have Indians as central characters. The way we know that is if you go in the Capitol Rotunda and look at the large paintings on the wall, several of them involve Indians, or by extension, one is the embarkation of the Pilgrims. And so that story would be incomplete without the Wampanoags and Squanto, the friendly Indian.
Well, why don't we stay